Everything tied up?
Yeah, and it's recording and everything.
Okay.
At least I hope so. Yeah.
Hold on for a minute. Well, like at the end of the first page of chapter 1.
Yeah, I marked in my safer exactly where it is.
Yeah.
I'll tell you exactly where we are at.
שנמצא בחינת העיון הזה הוא רק בחינת כאילו ובחינת העמוקת בינה עצמה. Like, that's what we were talking about till now, that basically the iyun, mean bina shababina, is the keli for the hasaga, which is the aimek hamusag, which is kesser of bina. So in other words, that the learning is the keli for the understanding of the explanation. The hasaga, this he doesn't say here, but basically the hasaga is the keli for the havana, which means chitzonius chachma, to actually see the thing. It means to have actual havana of really what it is, not just the explanation, but the actual thing. It's actual understanding what it is, not just the hasaga means to understand the explanation.
Right.
The havana means to see the thing. That's the chachma.
Right.
The havana is the key for the chachma, which means talumas chachma means to really see the inner essence of the thing.
Right.
And that's already a thing of also of knowing it, which not knowing means das, but that's das elyon, which is kesser, because talumas chachma is already in kesser. And that's the keli for the radla. Radla means that to actually experiencing the actual thing itself without anything from yourself at all. Lo isyada means that you don't have any self-concept involved in it. Right?
Right.
Okay, and this goes on and on and on. Each lower level, as we know, is a keli for a higher level.
Right.
Okay, but now he's saying he's going to go down a little bit instead of going up. This is where we left off, basically. This iyun, this thing of iyun, is called by everybody contemplation or meditation. If you notice, everybody seems to think that this is it says kuntas Hitbonenut, and they call it the kuntas of meditation or contemplation.
Right.
Okay, but he says Belashna Island, that's what people call it. It's not like that at all. The Hamokas Hadas Hainu Pchinas Kelu Levad Lavola Emek Shala Inyan Mamish, because the concentration is also a keli to hold all these other things. In other words, at each level, the das is the chitzonius keli. In other words, on the level of bina shababina, if you don't have concentration, the bina shababina won't work.
Right.
Okay, but then on the next level up, when you're going from bina from oimik amusak to the actual haskalah of the thing, also you need das. And the same thing to go from the havana of chachma to pnimius chachma, you also need das. So at every point, the das is, in other words, you have to concentrate on it. So in other words, once you know the explanation, you have to concentrate on the explanation in order to go to the next deeper level. So the das is a keli to go deeper and deeper into it, but it's not the actual oimik.
Right. The instrument by which to arrive at the...
it's an instrument.
Right.
Right. The concentration is not the actual thing.
Right.
And this is the basic... it's not just it's not the actual thing. The bina shababina is also not the actual thing.
Right. It's also an instrument.
It's also an instrument, but the das is not even that kind of an instrument. The das is an instrument for an instrument.
Right.
Because the bina shababina will actually get you there. Because the bina shababina is on the explanation.
Right.
Whereas das by itself, and this is the whole mistake sake of Avodah Zarah, basically.
Right.
And this is a matter of fact what Avodah Zarah is. That they see the da'as as being the primary instrument.
Right.
In other words, they might even understand, yeah, well, of course, that the concentration is not the actual thing. The whatever, the God realization or whatever they want to call it, that's the actual thing.
But you arrive at it directly from the da'as.
From da'as. In other words, you concentrate and you think God, 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 or something like that.
Right.
And the concentration will get you to that. But really, the thing is that what he's saying, it's a kli not for the actual inyan, but just to go deeper into the inyan. In other words, you already have to have the inyan to start off with. And
Right.
there's the thing, in other words, that the basic thing is that the das has to have a teichen.
Right.
And the das itself does not supply the teichen. It's the bina shababina which supplies the teichen.
Right.
So, but maimik is also concentration. It's all the same thing. It's just that when it's on the bina shababina, it's
Well, if
to
the
get to the,
bina from a bina, then that's the lower da'as that he's talking about
that's
here?
called hamakas hadas,
That's the amakas of that, which is the lower one. not
lower one.
maimik.
And then the maimik is when you're concentrating on the oimik hamusog, and even when you have it in the way of a muskol, the maimik means that you keep concentrating and thinking it over and over, and then just megia l'mayla gamina chochma atzma. In other words, that gets you to not just to a general oversight of understanding. In other words, the chitzonius chochma means that you just get the explanation in a way of seeing.
Right.
It's not an actual seeing into the actual thing.
Right.
That's talumus chochma.
You see the explanation.
Huh?
The chitzonius chochma is you see the explanation.
You don't just see the explanation. You actually see what the explanation is about, but you don't
Right.
see mamish what the actual thing is about. And not only that, in talumus chochma, it can be even higher than that, because that's talumus chochma. Actually, once you get in the way of talumus chochma, you can even see what some other things are about, because it gets to the shayrish of the thing.
Right.
Not just the thing, but the actual root of the thing.
Right.
In other words, like for instance, in terms of physics, in terms of physics, there's
Right.
the explanation. Then there's a thing where, like, a real physicist actually has it in a way of that he already understands more than just the explanation.
Right.
But it does mean that he has the actual root of the physics, which is like metaphysics.
Right.
That's the root of the physics already, because the root of the physics really will answer questions in other fields also.
Right.
That's the talumus chochma. Right. שהגם שהחוכמה הבחינה אין ממש של המושכל, קודם שבא לכלל עמק נקודת המושג של הבינה. In other words, the chokhmah is when the concept is still not in a particular way of a particular explanation.
Right.
The oimek hamusag means that the oimek hamusag dafka according to this particular explanation. So even though the chokhmah is in a way of an ein compared to the oimek nekudas hamusag shalbina kamayin legabi nahar kanal, aber prinas hamoka b'shoyve shel hamuskol. In other words, like the thing is that you can just look deeply in terms like physics or something like that. Like a scientist will look deeply into this thing and get all kinds of scholars and stuff like that. But he won't look even deeper. I mean, how did the whole thing come into existence in the first place?
Right.
In other words, yeah, okay, there's laws and this is the thing, you see that they're actually missing the thing even from their own language, like they say, the laws of nature. A law, even the word they use, a law means that somebody's making this law.
Right.
Where does this law come from? You know,
Right.
in other words, what's the shayrish of the muskal?
Right.
So if you don't keep thinking more about the shorish of the muskal, you don't get, then you can get to the ain where you understand the chokhmah not in the way of an explanation, but you didn't think about it any further.
Right.
That's where the whole mind of the chokhmah comes from. The nikra imke chokhmah or talumus chokhmah, the hidden parts of the chokhmah. Kikmash yesh emek ve'erech v'rechav b'bina, shenikra yesh kanal, kach yesh emek ve'erech v'rechav b'mayan the chokhmah, shenikra ein.
Right.
The emek hamayan, hainu tchilas shorish machzova b'emkei, shemisham mitpashes nevi'osu l'mayla, ad shebakeh v'yetze tipen begala mehelma v'tachlis helmai v'tachlis emko lemata. Under it's called the aquifer.
Right.
The aquifer is like there's a giant ocean under the ground that the Mayan comes from. Now, the thing is, you'll see one Mayan and you'll see another Mayan. Really, they both connect to the same Talumas Chochmah.
Right.
So, in other words, if you'll follow physics or if you follow psychology, really, they come from the same place.
Right. If you follow them to their ultimate conclusion, they really come from the same source.
Yeah, the same like a Mayan, this Mayan and that Mayan. When you go to the Emek, it's the same aquifer.
Right.
It's not really two different things. On the surface, it's two different things. This one is in Pittsburgh, and that one's in California. But when you go down far enough, you see there's really one big ocean down there that they're both coming from.
Right.
ונקרא אם כחוכמה תלומס חוכמה, כי כמו שיש עמק וערך וערך בינה שנקרא יש, כך יש עמק וערך וערך מעיין חוכמה נקרא אין. ועמק המעיין היינו תחילת שורש מחצבה בעמקה שמשם מתפשט נביאוס למעלה עד שבקע ויצא טיפים בגלוי. That's the actual external מעיין מאלמו, ותכלית האלמו הוא תכלית עמקה למטה כמו מעיין הסתיים נפקעו, that the Mayan's time, the real Mayan is what we call the spring, is really the tail of the spring.
Right.
It's not the actual spring. It's just the end of the spring.
Right.
It's like the malchus of the spring. It's not the kesser of the spring.
Right.
The nifko, the ar chalchula mechalchala, begidin. It has what do you call it? Veins in it.
Fissures.
And these veins is in all kinds of things. Same thing like with oil.
Right.
Sheyesh lahem oimek rishon, that these mayanas, what you're seeing out here, that's not the actual real mahus of the Mayan. The real thing that makes the Mayan is the oimek rishon, the aquifer. ובזה נאמר, והחוכמה מאין תימצא. החוכמה מאין מהלם החוכמה נקרא עמק החוכמה.
Right.
In other words, compared to that, it says החוכמה מאין תימצא, means the chokhmah is already a metzius.
Right.
And the real ain of the chokhmah is the talumas chokhmah.
Right.
And what is chokhmah? Now he's giving the definition. החוכמה הוא המצאת שכל החדש, שיש כברך. It's a discovery of a new idea, which comes out like a lightning
bolt.
But the lightning, this lightning here is really a Sayyid Abba already. That's when it comes out, when it becomes a barak. That's already the yesh of the chokhmah. Even in the chokhmah agluya, when it comes out like a barak, the barak is already something that can, your side is already the connection to the outside.
Right.
The barak is where you can bring the idea into an actual yesh already. The bina brings out, like when somebody has a new thought, it brings out from this barak. So this barak is already, in terms of the chokhmah, the barak is already the yesh of the barak. In another place it explains it's called Yesod Abba. That's already connected.
Kabarak. It's coming out.
It comes out. In other words, he's saying two things here. That it's the Hamtzah Sechel HaChadash Sheyotzeh Kabarak.
Right.
It comes out like a lightning, Keyadua. Umokar Machzava, but however, the actual root of it, the source of it, Behelam Amka, who Ikar Atzmius Techtechanon. That's the real Atzmius of the Chochmah. The real Indian of Chochmah is really Talumus Chochmah in the Kesser, which that's why, in a lot of the Kabbalistic and Chassidic books, when you read, sometimes they say Chochmah and it means the Chochmah Gluya, and a lot of times you say, it says Chochmah, and it really means Chochmah of Arich.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, when it says that the Torah comes from Chochmah, it really is from Chochmah of Arich.
Right.
It doesn't mean from the Chochmah Gluya of Atzilus. It means it's from Chochmah of Arich, really. Kanal bebir inyan oimek hamusag the bina, and this is the same thing. So now he's using the bina as a marshal on the Chochmah. She'eina raka oimek shel hasoga the bina hamurgish b'chinas yesh ba'avonas dover ma'bisvor niglis. That the oimek hamusag is the depth of the explanation.
Right.
That's felt in a actual way of a somethingness when you understand something in the svara niglas. A svara means a particular svara. A svara is already a yesh. A svara is like a theory.
Right.
She'emek shel hesber hasoga hu b'chinas ein shel hayesh hasoga bilvad. In other words, when you understand the explanation, it's in a way of an ein, but it's only the ein of the yesh, of this explanation. The ein la'erech legabe ein de chochma, terem sheba liklal hasoga klal. Gam lo b'chinas ha'emek sheba. In other words, where the chochma is still not in a way of this particular explanation altogether. But even in the Chochmah, well, remember, now he's not really explaining so much Bina, he's explaining Chochmah. The Bina is a thing on the Chochmah.
Marshal for it.
A muscle. So the thing is that the flash is over here he's telling you that the Eimek HaMusag is the Ein of the Yesh.
Right.
And over there, what it is, the flash is the Yesh of the Ein.
Right.
And there's a deeper Ein of the Ein, and there's even deeper than that, the Ein in the Talumus Chochmah, which is a total Ein, which even has nothing to do with this particular Chochmah altogether. All the Chochmas come from it. It's not just this Mayan that comes from it, it's all the Mayanas come from it.
Right.
Shehit Amtzisa, that this Eimek HaMusag is the Tamtzis. The Tamtzis means the essence, by the way. In English, somehow they use essence for self. Essence means Tamtzis. You know what a Tamtzis is?
Yeah, it's an essence.
An essence means essence of almond or something like that.
Right, that's why I was going to ask you, why does he use dafka, this term over here? Tamsis is usually the essence that is a derivative after you've already processed it and you've come to the ultimate conclusion after the process.
Right, that's the Eimek HaMusag. He's saying the Eimek HaMusag is the Tamsis, right? After you process the whole explanation and you come to the Tamsis of it, which now you understand like addition.
So how do you translate Atzmus
Atzmus is selfness.
Right, okay.
It's always mistranslated. They call it quintessential and stuff like that, but it's not. It's really a very bad mistranslation. Essence means Tamsis. And a Tamsis means that you process the whole thing and got the taste out of it. In other words, like instant coffee is Tamsis of coffee beans. Where you got out just the part you need out of it. So like, for instance, like in addition, you sit down and they sit down with little kids and they tell them 1 fishy plus 1 fishy is 2 fishies. And then they understand after a while, by the time they get to 2nd or 3rd grade, they don't even have to learn like that. They say like 1 plus 1 is 2, then they teach them all the different things, how to add all kinds of things, and then they have a whole bunch of examples, and you do your homework. But finally, like for instance, I know how to add. So which example do I know how to add?
All of them.
I know all of them, but how do I know all of them?
Because
I mean, do I have a fantastic computer in my brain that has every single number addition in it, like 2,500 plus 7,600? No, I just have the tamsis of the whole thing.
Right.
I just have the tamsis, same like the coffee. The instant coffee is the tamsis of the coffee beans. I threw away now all the parts that I don't need, like all the examples that I had to sit down and do, and I just have the tamsis of the way how to add. And that, but that tamsis is just the oimek hamusag.
Right.
That the oimek hamusag means that when you went through the whole hasbara, then you have the tamsis, and the thing is like this: the tamsis, it explains in other places. There's the, as a matter of fact, I think it's in Kuntesait Pilus. There's the kitzer before the Hitbonenut and the kitzer after the Hitbonenut.
Right.
So the kitzer before the Hitbonenut is there's a God in the world. You know, like the story with the Deichel, or sometimes some people say it was the Alter Rebbe with his father-in-law, that he asked him that so what did you learn? He said, I learned there's a God in the world.
Right.
And he said, hey, the maid knows that. And he called the maid. He said, you know there's a God in the world? He says, sure. Who doesn't know there's a God in the world? So the Deichel or the Alter Rebbe answered, she thinks there's a God in the world. I know there's a God in the world.
Right.
In other words, he had the kitzer after the Hitbonenut, and she had the kitzer before the Hitbonenut. And this is the thing that, again, where there's another point where they make their mistake, that the kitzer before and the kitzer after look exactly the same.
On the surface.
On the surface. I mean, he said exactly what the maid said.
Right.
He said, I know there's a God in the world. And the maid said also, I know there's a God in the world. So what's the difference? What makes him the big Rebbe and she's just a stupid maid? Why? Because he had the tamsis afterwards. Not only that, really he had after the tamsis. Like he's going to explain that even the tamsis is not, there's more after the tamsis.
Right.
Where are we here? Tamsisa. So that's the oimek hamusag. The omnam oimek hamusag Nikra Shaar HaNun Bebina. He says, but wait a minute, there's another oimek hamusag. There's the Shaar HaNun of Bina. The thing of the oimek hamusag where you understand the explanation.
So
but
so the amnam here means but.
Yeah. However, the oimek hamusag usually in other places, the oimek hamusag of Bina is called the Shaar HaNun of Bina.
Right.
Now, the Shaar HaNun of Bina is not so simple like that, because we say that even Moshe Rabbeinu had a hard time to get to the Shaar HaNun of Bina.
Right.
So how come? If it's just the tamsis of the explanation, and that's the oimek of Bina, it says there's the oimek, and the oimek of the oimek.
Right.
Gam shenimshach me'ein de chochma layesh, even though the Shaar HaNun is in Bina, and it's in a way of bringing from the Ein of Chochmah to an actual yesh of an explanation, to a somethingness.
Right.
More mayin yetzim beis kodesh kadoshim tchilosa kikane chagovim chulu kaigav. No, it starts off, this mayin starts off like a horn, huh?
Like the antenna of a locust.
Antenna of a locust. And also that's why the Bina is also called a shofar, that it starts, the shofar starts in a narrow and ends up wide. And that's also, the horn of plenty.
Right, the cornucopia.
Is that what it's called? The horn of plenty also starts short starts narrow on one side and opens up on the other side. So this Shaar HaNun, even though it comes from the Ein of Chochmah to the Yesh of Bina, Shorsha Megia Ba'omek the Chochmah Hanal. The real oimek of Bina is not there's the first oimek, which is Keser of Bina. Means Keser of Bina of Atzilus. But then there's a same like Chochmah has an oimek, which is in Chochmah of Arich. Really, there's also Bina of Arich.
Right.
And really, there's even a deeper one. The Shaar HaNun keeps going. And the Shaar HaNun keeps going even higher than that. Then there's Bina of Atik. And it really keeps going into Red Law. And really, like he explains later, there's Nagila v'Nismach HaBach Mamish.
Right.
Which is, in a way, even higher than the Chochmah. And this is what it explains about the Levyosin. The Levyosin can jump from the upper water to the lower water, from the lower water to the upper water.
Right.
It goes all the way into the actual Oimek of Chochmah, V'kanira Bachush, like we see in actuality, Shekol Maimik Rak Ba'omek HaMusag, Hu Mamtzi Lamoka V'Sheirish HaMuskal. Like we see over here, that we are basically Maimik in the explanation of the Shaar HaYichud.
Right.
Which basically... which basically explains, like over here, it explains what these concepts are, and later on, the basic book, like over here, it explains what Hitbonenut is, these first few chapters, and later, chapter 10 onwards, really what he doesn't explain about God, he really is explaining about how the world came into existence.
Right.
The Seder Hishtalshelut. But nonetheless, it's laham sipchinot chadoshes the ora chochma bebina. This looking into the oimek hamusag, even though you're only concentrating on the oimek hamusag and on the explanation, nonetheless it brings a new light of chochma into the bina. Like like Shimon says a lot of times, that each time he reads the book, it's like it's a whole new book.
Right.
So what do you mean it's a whole new book? It's the same book. How could it be a whole new book? It's
right.
The same book with exactly the same letters. The book didn't change. There's no funny thing happened and the book changed. And yet, what do you mean it's a whole book? Because now he sees it in a whole new light of Chochmah and the Bina.
Right.
That even though all he concentrated the first time, he just learned the explanation. And the second time, even though he learned it in a new way, but again, he just learned the explanation. And even some of the things that we are already sometimes talking about things that are not even explained in the book, yet where did we get them? We got them from the book.
Right.
Vahu anikra maimik, and that's why it's called a maimik. Hamokas adas means just to concentrate on your first learning. When you're learning it, you concentrate on it. But then after you learn it, then, like, in other words, right now, we're doing it with Hamokas adas. We're using the power of our concentration to concentrate on what we're talking about.
Right.
But then later on, after we finish talking, so we're going to be walking around thinking about it.
Right.
What does it really mean? In other words, what is the shayrish of this thing? And that, maimik, is lashon mafil. You know, how do you say that? Activation. Shemafil lo'emik dechuf. That it activates the depth of Chochmah and Bina. In Arich, and then in Atik, and even more than that. Okay, now I don't know if he says this later, but there's a special, a better thing in Bina than Chochmah in the terms that the Shaar HaNun, even though it's in a way of a yesh, but when it reaches in, when the Shaar HaNun reaches into the oimek of the Chochmah, it can bring it out. It traps it in the way of a yesh, so that he can take it out and bring it out to other people. and he can bring it. He can bring it into an explanation. Whereas somebody who just gets a spiritual insight or an intuitive feeling into it, it doesn't. He might not even be able. Not only he won't be able to explain it to somebody else, but he might even lose the idea to himself.
Right.
You know, a few days later, you know,
it dissipates.
It dissipates, and this is the thing, you know, like people, you know, sometimes get real drunk or stoned or something like that, and they have this flash of wisdom, and the next day they don't remember what it was at all.
Right.
Or else it's the thing that it says about, you know, the story about Edison and other people that, you know, sometimes they would have a flash of Chokhmah. If they wouldn't write it down right away, they would forget it, actually. Not only they wouldn't be able to explain it to themselves, but they would mamish lose it.
Right.
Whereas the Shaar Bina, he gets it in a way, he goes just as deep as the Oimek of Chokhmah, but he gets in a way of a yesh.
Right.
ולפי מה שנאמר הב מחוכמה וחוכמה בבינה שמבואר בכתובים, דהיינו אב דסק חוכמה בבינה means חוכמה בבינה, שהוא רק, what is חוכמה בבינה? שהוא רק להבין דבר חידוש אחר מתוך המושג דבינה. In other words, to understand just a new chidush, but in this same bina. So like, for instance, in computers, an innovation in computers, you notice, is not made by somebody who went in the Himalayas and meditated.
Right.
It's made dafka by the people who work with computers over and over again and think about it and what did they think about? I mean, obviously they couldn't have thought about the innovation because they didn't know the innovation.
Right.
So they must have thought about what they already knew. And yet they came up with an innovation. Same thing with cars. Like you see that the cars are getting better and better all the time. You know, a car right now is not like a Model T from the 1930s.
Right.
And yet, who came up with the better cars was the car companies, the people, the engineers that work for the car companies. And where did they come up with it? They came up with it from going over, in other words, when they went to college, for instance. Let's say a guy is now going to innovate a new thing in cars. How did he learn about cars? He went to college. What did he learn in college? He learned about the cars that we already have.
Right.
He's an engineer according to what we have, or an engineer in waterworks, or an engineer in electricity, or whatever you want to say.
Right.
What he learns in college, or a doctor, they learn dafka what we already know.
Right.
They don't learn what they're going to invent. And yet they invent a new thing, but the invention is dafka in their field. In other words, like an engineer in computers is not going to invent a new invention of a new drug that will cure certain diseases.
Right.
He's going to invent a better computer. Like they had the Pentium, now they have the Pentium 2, and the Pentium 3, and the Pentium 4, and soon they're going to have some other things, you know.
Right.
And already they're thinking maybe they'll make a computer, you won't even need a keyboard, you'll just talk to it, and they already have like all kinds of these things, and they're getting better and better. So how are they getting better and better? That's the Indian of Chokhmah Shababina. When you go over to Bina Shababina, this again, what he's talking about here is which is the activating power.
Right.
The activating power of all the other powers, and later on in various places going to explain also the activation of the lower powers of the Midos also comes out from Bina Shababina. And the way it works, it has to be like this. It's Bina Shababina within the Keli of Das.
Right.
That in other words, somebody who is going to be a computer genius, but he's not really interested in computers in the first place. So you tell him, so why do you want to be a computer genius? He says, well, I want to make computer inventions and then I'll be a millionaire.
Right.
He's probably not going to invent nothing new.
Right, because really what he wants to be is a millionaire. He's not interested in computers.
Okay, but look, he's going to college and and stuff like that, and he's learning the explanation.
Subject.
He's doing the Bina Shababina, but he doesn't have the Keli of Das. In other words, the Das is also something. It's not like totally nothing, but it's a Keli.
In it.
It's a Keli, and it's a necessary Keli, but the thing is that if you have the Keli without the... it's basically like a glass of water. If you don't have the glass, the water will just spill out.
Right.
But on the other hand, if there's a guy in the desert and he's dying from thirst, and you give him a glass, it's not going to help him nothing.
Right.
The same thing, if you just give him water without a glass, it'll just spill in the sand, and it also won't help him nothing. Like if you just throw some water at him.
Right.
Hey, you're thirsty, here's some water.
Yeah, they have to come together or they're useless.
Right. If you don't have the keli to hold the water in, it's useless. On the other hand, the keli by itself is also useless. Okay, so where are we? Okay. Chacham shurak lavin dover chidush acher b'ntoich hamusag debina shezeu eno ella al yedei b'chinas ha'iyun now. This chachma shebabina does not come by itself that you can say, okay, I'm going to innovate something now. There's a kuntras from the Rebbe Rashab on how to learn Gemara.
Right.
Which basically what he says there is you cannot go for chidushim.
Right.
You should not try to make a chiddush. If you're trying to make a chiddush, your chiddush will be what he calls a real chiddush.
Right.
It's a real chiddush.
It's invented.
It was not told to Moshe Rabbeinu and Sinai.
Right.
It's a real. It's really a chiddush. Means you invented it out of your head. But actual chiddush of a Talmud Vasik is dafka means that you learn, first of all, you don't go for the chedushim, you learn the text of the Gemara first, then you learn it with Rashi. You say, what, that's what I'm going to learn, to just Talmud with Rashi? I want to be a Machadish.
Right.
If you want to be a Machadish, you'll never be a Machadish. Just the opposite. It's dafka when you do the Iyun, then the Chiddush will come automatically.
Right.
So it's Davka al Yedipina Iyuna now, which is Bina Shababina, and what he's saying here basically, and that's what the whole chapter is about, is that Bina Shababina within the Keli of Das is the activator of all the powers, whether above it or below it. and basically in Kundis Hitbonenut, he explains that the Hitbonenut of the Midos comes Davka from Hitbonenut.
Right.
And over here he's explaining that also the higher powers. In other words, the real thing that you really want is the Eimik of Chochmah.
Right.
The flash of light. Or even higher, the unification with the ultimate unity, with the infinite light, and stuff like that. And what will you do? Oh, I'll meditate on the light. But he says, no, it doesn't work like that. It's Dafka the Iyun that activates both the powers below it. And as a matter of fact, even the Das is Dafka activated by the Bina Shababina. So that, for instance, you notice with us, we have a bigger Das into it. I don't mean knowledge Das. I mean a connection to it than somebody who didn't learn as much as us.
Right.
Why? Because we activated up to the Kesser, so the Das also gets activated. And that's dafka because of the Bina Shababina. The more you understand about something, and this is anything.
Right.
The more you understand about something, the more your das towards that thing is activated. The only thing you have to remember, there's two kinds of das. There's a negative das too. In other words, when you understand more and more about something, you might understand that this is a bad thing.
Right.
So you'll have a das that you want to stay away from it.
Right.
The opposite of concentration. You don't want to think about it. You don't want to think about it at all. Right. The more you understand, the more the das gets activated. And the dafka through the iyun anal shuhu ha'mevarer kol halokav aburyav. That means the iyun means analysis, to separate out all the parts of it according to its various classifications Means mavar means you take, okay, this one is the red one, you put it here, and this one is the green one, you put it here. And then we see we have 3 red ones and 2 green ones.
Right.
And that's how it's made up, and then here, and there's a blue one. So, like, for instance, like if you want to know, like, how a television screen works, how this picture comes up, you say, well, over here there's a red one, and then 2 green ones, then a blue one.
Right.
That's how this screen works, right?
Right.
And this is the same thing with all of the various things. That, in other words, how does a personality work? We say, well, a personality is made up of intellect and emotions. That's your first separation into 2. And you say, well, intellect, what is intellect? Well, you say in intellect there's 3 parts, Chokhmah, Bina, and Das. And then there's the super intellect of Kesser.
Right.
And in emotions, there's these 7 various emotions. There's love, and the basic 2 divisions is love and hate, or love and fear. You know, so
right.
You separate it, and then you separate it more and more. Then you're saying within love, there's also 10 separations.
Right.
You know, Venikra, and this is called, this analysis of the thing into its parts is called Bina Shababina. The Harkach, only when he does this analysis, Yochal Lahovid Litchachem Lahamsi Havona Vasoga Chadasha. It's Dafka, the people who know all the analysis of all the parts of a car can come up with a better car.
Right.
Like, for instance, I could not come up with a better car because I have no idea how the motor works.
Right.
I don't know what's going on in the motor, but somebody who knows every single part of the motor, Dafka, somebody like that can come up with a better motor. Okay, but what? But Chokhmah Shebabina aval rak b'hasaga zu atzma. But only in a car.
Right. It can innovate outside of his field.
Outside of his field. And even like you say, but what about like the Wright brothers? But it's still a machine. A traveling machine. They just took a motor from a car and they put it on the airplane.
Right.
And they use some of their okay, that's really in a way an Indian of tuna that goes from one field to another field. And it's also an innovation like Chokhmah Shebabina also. I mean Bina Shebachokhmah and stuff like that, you know, but the basic thing of Chokhmah Shebabina is just to make an innovation in this hasaga itself. Shanikra Chokhmah Shebabina. Aval Kesed the Bina, who oy make hamusaga now, and that's the first, the Kesser of Bina itself, and in the Kesser there's also the Chitzonius of Kesser of Bina, which is just to understand the explanation. Hamagia Shorsha, but the Shirish of the Kesser of Bina is in oy make hachokhmah canal. The real thing he wants to understand is not just the explanation, but the real actual thing.
Right.
So that's what Chokhmah Shebabina is. V'hav mechokhmah means Bina of Chokhmah. I know Sag Da'ab. Shahu koach ha'hesber b'chokhmah atzma. The hiyuli inherent power of explanation within a chokhmah. That in other words, when you understand something beyond the just explanation, and you have it in the way of the ain of chokhmah, it's inherent in this chokhmah that you could explain it.
Right.
Even though you didn't explain it at all yet. But if somebody will ask you, you'll be able to explain it. Sheyuchol la'aviyah bepanim masbiros harbe, in different ways, not just in one way. When he goes past the oimik hamusag of Bina into the actual chokhmah of the thing, it's inherent in the chokhmah, the Bina of chokhmah, that he should be able to then explain it in various different ways. But this is still higher than the actual hasaga. It's not that he actually explained it. It's a hiyuli for explanation.
Right.
And this is besides the thing of the koach ha'hesper. So Bina shebachokhmah has 2 inyanim. Koach ha'hesper is Bina shebachokhmah going downwards. Means that he could bring this chokhmah into various explanations of Bina. But he says, but, this is but. But what they said, navoinim lo yishtakachu, they didn't mean that there are not people who could explain it. He's saying that's something
No problem.
Yeah. Al ken yuchal lahavin dover chachma acheres legamre metoich dover chachma zois. That the power of Bina of Chochmah reaches the root of the power. It means the inner power of Bina of Chochmah. Megia ba'emek al Chochmah, now like we said, into the aquifer. And that's why you can understand a different Chochmah from this Chochmah.
Right.
Now, he's telling you two things here, not just one thing. He told you two things, that there's actually three things about the power of Bina of Chochmah. One thing is when it goes downwards, is that it's the inherent power of explanation to bring out from Chochmah to Bina is through Bina of Chochmah.
Right.
To bring it out from just a Chochmah into an explanation. That's dafka from the power of Bina of Chochmah.
Right.
That's one thing. The other thing, which is the real thing of the Bina of Chochmah, the real inner thing of Bina of Chochmah, is lahavin dover mitoch dover, means to understand a deeper wisdom from an external wisdom.
Right.
And then he said, and also because it is, since he goes into the aquifer, he'll be able to understand a different wisdom from this wisdom.
Right, a different field altogether.
A different field. From this field, he'll be able to carry it into a different field. Why? Because he understood it all the way into the aquifer, and that's the source of all the wisdoms. Then he was able to bring out from that, not to this wisdom, but to a different wisdom.
Right.
So that's like a sideways. Besides going, it can go down, it can go up, and it can go sideways.
Right, it's like a width.
It's like a width of it, but it can bring it into a different wisdom altogether, but the other wisdom can be on the same level as this wisdom.
Right.
And this is like what we said about the Wright brothers, that they were bicycle makers and were interested in cars, and they brought it into airplanes.
Right.
Why? Because they understood, they didn't just, I mean, they were not really total nevoinim, but it's good just for a mushal, for an external mushal. In other words, what they did is they looked into it. They didn't just look at a motor as a car motor.
Right.
They looked into its root.
Right.
A supplier of power.
Right.
And then they said, well, the same like it could supply power to a car, it could supply power to an airplane.
Right.
And then they were bicycle makers.
Right.
So, they knew how to make those chains and gears. You know how you drive a bicycle? It has those gears with the teeth in it that connect into the chains. Like now, the airplanes aren't made like that, but the original airplanes, it had those things connecting to the propeller,
Right.
So they took from bicycles to airplanes. Why? Because they didn't look at just a chain as like somebody else would have just would have a more chitzonius level, would just know how to make a bicycle, and he would never think of how this would apply to something else.
Right.
But they thought into the root of it. They didn't see it just as a bicycle. They saw it as a way to move the energy from the feet to the wheel.
Right.
Through the chain and the gear, and they saw it as the inner point of the thing, a way to move energy from one thing to another thing.
Right.
So in other words, that the inner level of the outer level, to explain it outwards, is lower than the actual Chochmah shebechochmah. But the Bina shebechochmah, the inner level of Bina shebechochmah, and Noven is higher than a Chocham. Why is that? Because a Noven is Bina shebechochmah, and a Chocham is really Chochmah shebechochmah. The Hainu megufa shulam tzos a Chochmah zu me'ein. She'eno mevin mimena Chochmah v'sechel acher. He just has an invention, but the Noven might not be able to come up with a new invention, but he can take an old invention and come up with a whole new thing out of it.
Right.
And in a way, it has a higher source. And not only that, it can reach into a depth higher than the Chokhmah itself, into the Lavin Dover Mitach Dover, and this Indian of a Dover Mitach Dover, remember, we're talking what is Hitbonenut in terms of Chassidus. And this is what he's talking about later. He says, Nagila v'misam boch mamish, it's with this power of Bina Shebachachma. That the Bina Shebabina will activate the Chokhmah Shebabina, and the Chokhmah Shebabina will activate the Bina Shebachachma. And then when you have the Chokhmah itself, when you have those things in a way of Ein, he'll be able to understand not just the Seder Hishtalshelut, but a Dover Mitach Dover, higher than the Seder Hishtalshelut. Right. From the Seder Hishtalshelut, he'll be able to understand into deeper than the Seder Hishtalshelut. That's basically what he's talking about here. And Mikol Moka Masha Bahasoga the Bina Mevin Hasoga Chadosha Mitach Hasaga Zu Shoisha Behovin the Chokhmah Shemevin Tova Mitach Dover. So, in other words, what he's saying that Bina Chokhmah Shebabina, the Shevish of Chokhmah Shebabina is in Bina Shebachachma.
Right.
Except that one of them is in the hidden part of the Seichel, and the other one is in the revealed part of the Seichel. The Daila Maven. Now we're starting a new thing, but it's very far. I'm going to go till the next Daila Maven, and then we're going to stop. The Nimtza Seder Madregas Kachem. So now he's going to tell you what is Hitbonenut. How do you do Hitbonenut? First of all, Pchinas Iyun Hanal. You start off with Bina Shababina. Lamod al Burya, to go and through the analysis of all the separate parts. And that's called Nikra Bina Shababina Lahavchin Tachlis Avchona Bepchinis V'chitzonyis, to examine to the utmost of examination the inner and outer things of whatever it is that you're examining. V'gam izeh yuchal v'yot Pchinas ha'eirech, and also from this can come the eirech of Bina, meaning to explain it down into mashalim. So that's Bina Shabina is also the Eirech of Bina. Esberem Shainim is already an innovation. L'kol tzad, kolo, that's not Bina Shabina. It's Dafa the Eirech. It's Bina Shabina means you understand in this explanation, only in this Eirech. The Rochav
is the Chokhmah Shebabina.
The Rochav is Chokhmah Shebabina. That's what he's going to say now. The Acharkach Mipchinas Chokhmah Shebabina Lahamsi Chadoshus, but Ba'asoga Achas Kanal, but Davka in this Asoga.
Right.
Who Anikra Rochav means you're giving a new twist on the thing. You understand a new inyan. Umimena Koyach the Bina Shebabina Oise Pchinas Eirech. And the way that you come up with a new explanation is that when you have the Chokhmah Shebabina, so then when you understand a new twist on a thing, then you can make a whole new eirech when you go and analyze that twist.
Right.
Aval Shira eirech va'arechav, the Chokhmah of Bina Shebabina, utale b'pchinas eimik hamusar, shenikra Chassidic Bina. In other words, like in Chassidus, like what we're learning here, the eirech and the rochav can be fantastic. Why? Because the Eimik is fantastic.
Right.
In a thing like understanding how to play chess, there's a big Reichav and Eirech, but not like this.
Right.
But more than checkers.
Right.
So that somebody who knows chess and somebody who knows checkers, everybody understands chess is a deeper game than checkers.
Right.
So since it's a deeper game, so there's all kinds of books written with strategies on chess and stuff like that. And checkers you can also write, but how much can you write already? Not like chess. Why? Because the Eimik of chess is bigger, so therefore the Reichav and the Eirech and Reichav will be bigger.
Right.
And not only that, but vice versa also. That you don't get to the Eimik without going through the length and the width. You don't just get to the Eimik by concentrating on it.
Right.
You know, it's Dafka when you go through the length and the width, the more you go through the length and the width. So like, for instance, a doctor that learned for 7 years, obviously knows more about medicine than I did. He knows all the explanations. He knows where all the bones are. He knows where all the organs are. Like sometimes, sometimes I consult her about things in Chassidus, like where it talks about the liver and stuff like that.
Right.
Or the kruma davira, how the brain is made, because she knows the actual physical makeup of these things.
Right.
And she explained to me certain things, how the liver works, how to, Why? Because she's a doctor. She went through the length. Okay, now a doctor that knows not only Occidental medicine, but might know also Oriental medicine and various other homeopathic medicine and other kinds of medicine. He has a wit. Probably might be a better doctor because he has more of than somebody who just concentrates. He only wants to know from one way of looking at medicine. He only knows one explanation,
Right.
So because he has a bigger roichav, he might have a bigger aimek also.
Right.
So it works both ways. According to the aimek hamusag of a certain thing, that's how much length and width you're going to have, and vice versa, how much you can get to the depth is dafka according to how much you went through the length and the width.
Right.
העמק המושג שנקרא כסר בינה, וכנראה בחוש שלפי ערך העמק, כך יהיה ערך הרחב והערך. בכל הסוגס דבר מה ודי למבין. In any kind of thing, that dafka according to how deep the subject matter is, that's how much length and width there will be in it.
Right.
And basically, really, it's also the other way around, which he doesn't say here, but really the main point, the real main point of this chapter is not so much that the length and width is according to the depth, but that reaching into the depth is according to how much you went through the length and the width. Dafka. In other words, dafka through the bina shababina, and really it's dafka through the length. Because you shouldn't make chidushim.
Right. Right.
In other words, what he said it here in a way from up to down. From the length comes the width, and from the depth comes the width, and from the width comes the length.
Right.
That's in a teacher that's teaching it.
Right, but we're really going from down up.
From down to up in terms of the student should concentrate dafka on the length. If he tries to concentrate on a width, he won't get nothing.
Right.
He'll just jump around. Once like these guys, one day they learn physics, they want to be a physicist, the next day, I want to be a chemist.
Right.
And the next day, I decided I want to be in computers. And the next day, no, I want to make airplanes. So,
just like what he says later on about the someone who's has a wide da'as, but he doesn't have
a deep da'as.
Doesn't have the deep da'as.
And really somebody like that really does
deep da'as because you're just jumping around.
Okay, but really something like that doesn't have a da'as at all.
Right.
It's a wide da'as.
Jack of all trades.
Yeah, there's people, they'll know about baseball, they know about football, they'll know a little bit about this, they'll know, but there's nothing that they're really into.
They really don't know anything, too much about anything.
Yeah, because they don't really have a deep das into one particular thing that really turns them on.
Right.
And that's basically a thing of, that's the thing of das, that the basic thing, the das has to hold you onto the length. In other words, the thing of the width is multiple lengths.
Right.
And in order to learn, you have to do dafka bina shababina, which means a single length. And then the same thing with people who have learned various Kabbalistic stuff. Here it tells them one thing, and they say, what do you mean? Chochmah is this? It says Chochmah is not this.
Right.
But that's a different length. So you have to either, in order to learn this length, you have to forget about that length.
Right.
And if you try to put the two of them together, you're not ready for the width yet.
Right.
Till you go through the length. When you go through the length of Shaar HaYichud, then you'll be able to go and understand how Chochmah does have letters and doesn't have letters.
Right.
And how Chochmah is in the Kuda, and yet it has dimensions.
Right.
Because it's talking about two different
Aspect.
two different lengths. There's two different explanations, and when you put the two of them together, it gives you a width.
Right.
You know, so that's the basic thing. You know, like the order of the levels is that it goes dafka from bina sheba bina. Dafka, you have to sit and learn a length and forget about the other length. You know. And then from that comes Chochmah Sheba Bina, that now you'll start seeing new things, but dafka in this explanation. And then you'll go from that, it'll come into the power of Bina Sheba Chochmah, which is the externality of Chochmah, really, not the inner Bina Sheba Chochmah. That you'll start seeing already, you'll start reaching into the fact that the hiyuli of many different explanations.
Right.
And from that, it will activate the power of Chochmah Sheba Chochmah, and then that will activate from the power of Bina Sheba Chochmah going up into the Talumas Chochmah, to understand a davar mitach davar, to understand we're not talking about a river.
Right.
But, by the way, that whole thing of like here we're talking about a river, it's not talking about a river. That's the Inyan of Bina Sheba Chochmah, to understand from a river, from the mashal to the nimshal.
Right.
And also to understand, in other words, that when we're saying a length, it's not the same length as the length of a river.
Right.
It's not a physical length. You know, so the length down, from up to down, when you go from down to up, that's to understand a thing from inside of a thing. Along the length.
Mm.
Right?
Right.
And that's the thing that it says when Mashiach will come, he will open up the river. Moshe Rabbeinu opened up the sea.
Right. Right. It says he'll open up the river.
And Mashiach will open up the river. And
It'll be lengthwise.
Right. What?
It'll be lengthwise, not sideways.
Yeah, right. That's the thing. As a matter of fact, it says it before. He'll open up the river and it'll become 7 Necholim.
Right.
He'll split it along the length, not along the width.
Right.
You know, so that's the thing. When Mashiach will come, he'll open up the river, and then you'll go up the length into the depth. When you go up the length of the river, you end up, you know, if you take a boat up the river, you end up by the...
At the source.
By the spring.
Right.
And if you keep going, you'll end up in the aquifer.
Right.
You know. And that's the basic thing. When he opens up the river, he'll open it up all the way to the aquifer.
Right.
So that the aquifer will be revealed, and that's what it says, that the mayonis of the time will come out.
Right.
That's the mabul. The mabul means that the hidden aquifer bursts out to the revealed. That's how the mabul works, right?
Right.
And both with the lower thymus and with the upper thymus. The upper thymus is also hidden.
Right.
And he'll open up over there also, that the upper thymus will burst, the Aruba Seshamayim Niftachu, will be opened up. Right now it's in Aruba, and he'll open it up so it's totally open, and everything's coming through not through an Aruba, but like you have a ceiling with a little hole in it, and then the whole ceiling comes down.
Right.
Like if the whole ceiling breaks down and the whole water that's on top of it just floods everything.
Right.
You know. So that's what we're going to expect very soon. Okay, I'm going to
May I ask you why does he mention Ab the Sag and Sag the Av?
Why does he mention Ab the Sag and Sag the Ab? Those are the numerical numbers in general. He mentions a lot of times the Shema and stuff like that. I think part of it is...
I mean, if you wouldn't have mentioned it, you would have had the exact same explanation.
You would. You're a novice. But later on, in terms of the Yud, like later on, he says the Yud of the Sag, also over there. If you just skip that whole thing, then the best thing, if you don't skip the whole thing, you'll just be stuck with it, and you won't understand nothing. when he gets to chapter 10 and stuff like that, that it says the Yud, he says the Yud of the Sag. But the Rishimu, or chapter, I don't remember which chapter, the Rishimu, maybe chapter 12.
That's Vav.
Yeah, it's the Yud of the Sag.
Right, well, that's why I'm asking you, how come he's mentioning Ab the Sag and Sag the Ab over here?
Because this was, in his days, it was written for people who were Kabbalists.
Right, and also later on,
and
you have the whole...
And not only that, later on, you'll also have something to do with it. Like later on, we looked into what is the Yud of the Sag, and now we can start understanding what it's talking about. Not only that, really the whole thing of the Shemus, what it explains later, the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei goes into its various, Ab Sag Maban. I mean, right now we have a very vague understanding of what each letter means in it and stuff like that. We just have the general thing of what a name is and stuff like that. But later on, we're going to understand why he said it.
Right.
There's a reason. It's not that for nothing. It's not for nothing.
Obviously, it's not for nothing. That's why I asked why it's there.
It's there for later. Right now, the way we're understanding it, it's enough to understand Chokhmah, Bina, and Bina of Chokhmah.
Right.
But how the whole thing works later on, and by the way, this is why we want so much to turn everybody else onto this. Because we're like on a, like a 007 thing. Actually, since we're in the 6th millennium, we're a 006 thing, actually. That we're like on a need-to-know basis. This was also the thing by the Nevi'im. It says that when the Eibishter was mad at the Jews, so Moshe Rabbeinu didn't get Nevuah, and he didn't get it either.
Right.
and when we get these other people to learn and they start asking this question, we're going to have to know the answer. And at that point, we'll know the answer. Also, at that point, we'll be able to sit in our retreat in the Catskills or wherever, on the Golan Heights or whatever, with a whole yeshiva with all the books, and we'll look it up in Eitz Chaim, what it says about the Ab of the Sag and the Sag of the Ab, and we'll know the exact letters, what the Yud of the Ab means, and what the Yud in the Vav means,
Right.
And why in Ab the Vav is spelled Vav Yud Vav, and in Sag is Vav Aleph Vav,
Right.
Stuff like that. And then we'll understand. But right now, basically, the answer is that this book was written for Kabbalists. And if you look, if you look through the Hillel Paracher, that's why I mostly tell people not to learn the Hillel Paracher, because Hillel Paracher is really more complicated than this, and it brings in a lot more Kabbalistic things. In a way, Hillel Paracher looks like part of what he's doing is that people had the same taina on the Mittler Rebbe as they had on the Rambam. That he didn't seem to bring Mekayris. Huh?
Where is he getting all this from?
Where is he getting all this from? Where is he coming up with his crazy stuff from? That's not what it says in Eitz Chaim.
Right.
In Eitz Chaim it says Ab of Sag, Sag of Ab, and stuff like that. And he's talking about basically something that you can apply to building cars and bicycles.
Right.
What does stuff from the Eitz Chaim have to do with building cars and bicycles? I told you that's the Ab of the Sag and the Sag of the Ab. And then in Hillel Paracher, a lot of it is apologetics for, not exactly apologetics, like showing how this really comes from Kabbalah.
Right.
But in order to do that, you have to know the Kabbalah.
Right.
I mean, right now, at the level that we're holding, I think basically that's the best explanation. Just that, he wrote this book. This book is like a Sefer Torah. It's a story for little kids. You know, Yosef and his brothers, so therefore you should treat your brother nicely. And it's on a level of a big rabbi in Halacha, and it's on a level of the biggest Kabbalist Arizal.
Right.
The story of Yosef is on all those different levels. And this book also, it's on a level that even a brand new guy who doesn't know from nothing, he can sit with this and learn it. And even the biggest, you know, like the Rebbe Rashab was proud of, what was he so proud of the Frierdiker Rebbe for? You'd think there'd be many things he would be proud of him for. The thing that he was the most proud of him for was that he read the Shaar HaYichud without his father telling him to and wrote a pirush on it.
Right.
This is the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Rebbe Rashab was so proud of it.
Right.
I don't think that the way the Frierdiker Rebbe and Rebbe Rashab read this book was the same way that we're reading the book. You know?
Right.
So this book is written on every level. As a matter of fact, like when the Eibishter, you know, decided that he's going to be the Eibishter and he wanted to know how to be the Eibishter, he had to read this book to find out who he is, you know? You know the story with Jackie Mason?
No.
You know, Jackie Mason he said, you know, I went to a psychologist. So the psychologist told me, I told him, so what am I doing here? He says, well, I'm going to help you find yourself. He says, what do you mean find myself? I'm right over here. I know where I am. He says, no, I'm going to help you find out who you are. He says, what do you mean? You mean I'm not me? I thought I was me, so maybe, you know, maybe really you're me and I'm you. So you give me the $50.
Right.
So, you know, and Eibishter, you know, had an identity crisis, and he wanted to find out who he is. So all you had to do is read the Shaar HaYichud. You know, this is written even for the Eibishter.
Right.
His mom is written, I mean, I know it sounds kind of funny, what do you mean written for the Eibishter? But really, it's written even for the Eibishter. And that's why the Eibishter wanted the world. Because he wanted to get the explanation dafka from idiots. The way that we understand it.
Right.
And when he sits here like today, I mean, there's you know, you had a 3-way conference call. It was actually a 4-way conference call. One of the conference calls was arranged for the Eibishter, and he was listening in on it also.
Mm-hmm.
And he found out a whole bunch of things. He says, "Oh, so that's who I am. Maybe you'll give me the $50."
Right.
Okay, thank you very much, Yossi.
Okay, sei gesund. Bye.
Be well. Go ahead.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so where were we exactly?
We were talking about Abdul Son.
Oh, yeah, we were getting the Dial of Maven.
Right.
So that was talking about Chochmah, Bina, and all this stuff. Now he's going to be talking about Das.
Right.
Ulafi zeh. So according to what we said before, Ma shekoyer ma'ilam ha'amokas hadas, en zeh gufa shel ha'amoka. That's not the actual essence of the depth. It's not the actual body of the depth. It's just the ha'amokas hadas is the deepening, but not the actual depth. Like, for instance, in you know, when you go to you take a deep dive off a board, the hamokas hadas is like the dive. The actual depth is the depth of the actual pool.
Right.
You know, that's where you're going to. So, like, for instance, let's say there's, you know, those people, you know, when you go to Hawaii, the you know, they throw money off the boat, and then those guys jump off their little boats and they go down to get it, you know?
Right.
So the depth is the floor of the ocean. The Hamokas Adas is the dive that gets them there. So basically, the Hamokas Adas is not the actual depth, it's the thing that gets you to the depth. Like, for instance, the Emek HaMusag of Bina, which means the actual depth of the actual concept. This has nothing to do with concentration. Like, for instance, to understand the depth of the thing of how computers work, when you go to school and learn, you have to concentrate in order to get that. But that has nothing to do with the concentration. The actual concept of the Emek HaMusag, that has nothing to do with concentration. Hadas, what is das? Concentration, in other words, to connect your feeling into the musag very much. And this is what brings about to going deeply into the musag after the analysis. Means once you know the pratim, that's still not enough. In other words, the bina shebabina without das, if you don't concentrate on it, you know, like there's two kids sitting in a classroom and one is getting A's and one is getting D's. They both hear exactly the same explanation. The teacher gave the same explanation to both of them. But since in one there was das, in the other one there was no das, so one of them got to the Emek HaMusag and one of them didn't get to the Emek HaMusag. But nonetheless, it's only after the iyun. Meaning that if one kid will concentrate real hard, would just say, well, you know, since I concentrate so hard, so I'll just stay home and concentrate.
Right.
That's not going to work because he didn't get the explanation. Shahu rak mo b'chinas keli la'omek ha'asoga kanal. In other words, the das is only a keli to get deeply into the hasoga, but you have to have the hasoga. וגם בדעת יש ערך וריחה ועמק, כמו יש מי שדייתא קצרה, like there's somebody who has a very short da'at, means like the attention span. So one of the things in terms of learning Chassidus is the attention span, a long da'at and a short da'at. In Ayin Beis, for instance, like in you know, both of these books are hemshech, you know. They're called the hemshech. What does it mean, a hemshech? That really, in order to do the proper Hitbonenut of the da'at, after you have the Emek HaMusag in your brain, you have to be able to hold the entire book in your head.
Exactly.
At one shot. Or even, like, for instance, now, let's say not the entire book, but at least, like right now, you have to hold a certain amount of it, like chapter 1. Or like right now, the Indian, this little paragraph that we're learning about Das, in order to think about it, you have to be able to hold it, this whole thing in your head at one shot.
Right.
That's one thing of the length of Das, and the other thing of it is like how long can you concentrate? In other words, like if you have an attention span of 3 seconds, I won't be able to learn with you. It's not going to help. Right. After 3 seconds, you're going to lose the attention span and be somewhere else. So, like, for instance, over here, in terms of our classes, you have to have an attention span of, like, somewhere between a half an hour to an hour for us to have these classes, right?
Right.
You have to, like, have a da'as to leave everything and put your whole da'as into just the class and take everything else away for about a half an hour to an hour. Now they did they did researches. The maximum attention span of an American is about 10 to 15 minutes.
About the cranberry pills? Yeah.
They did it for the TVs. You know, that's where they put the commercials. You know, they. After about 10 minutes, even if it's a very interesting program, people tend to lose their attention span.
Right.
And also in movies, if you keep a certain scene going for too long, you have to switch to another scene. Otherwise, you're going to lose your audience.
Right.
You know, like those Indian movies?
The Indian
those
movies.
long drawn, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Those long drawn Indian movies that an American won't be able to sit through it. Or like some of this arty Scandinavian movies and stuff like that, you know?
Right.
So that's a dat ksara means, first of all, it's a short attention span, and also the power of holding on to a certain idea in your mind, how long you can hold on to. So that, for instance, I don't know if you've noticed, when you go through Ayin Beis, you go through, a certain particular idea can be like 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 chapters.
Right.
And you're going through it, and you're learning something, and after a while, you don't even know what he's talking about anymore. Because you can only hold about maybe, you're already holding 10 chapters in your mind is already blowing up. You know.
Right. You have to have an incredible da'as.
An incredible length of da'as.
A length of da'as.
You have to be able to keep your concentration on a fantastically long idea.
Right.
Which sometimes over there, I've noticed that some of the ideas are like 30 to 100 chapters long, but really it's even longer. It's really the whole thing is one idea.
Right.
And we see that most of us, I know I have a longer das than most of these people because I have the das from here.
Right.
And I can, sometimes I can't even hold on to like his part of the idea, which is like 30 chapters long. I go through the thing, and after a while I have no idea what he's talking about. I forget what he was talking about before.
Right.
I can't hold the whole thing in my mind because my das is not that long.
Right.
So there's some people that have a much longer attention span. They can sit with one thing for a much longer time. And in general, kids, you notice kids have a very short attention span.
Right.
Like we were talking before, that he knows a little bit of everything, but he can't stay with one thing for a long time. The das chazak, or else a very strong das, means like he's very opinionated. Or das kal, meaning that it's very easy to change his opinion. Kenoshim shadait and colors. In women, it doesn't mean that there's some women who have a stronger das than certain men. But in general, what you'll find out is that, like, for instance, like let's say a frum woman like your wife, I would say, when you say, what do you mean, I have a das call, I can show you most men don't have as heavy of a das as she does.
Right.
But we're talking in terms of people who are on the same level. That's because she's a frum lady who's into learning and stuff like that. You know?
Right.
But so she has not such a das kala like, let's say, some guy who's into like rock and roll and stuff like that.
Right.
But if you look at that guy's girlfriend, you'll see that her das is even lighter than his. You know?
Right.
Or, like, if you'll see, like, some Rebbitzin, the wife of some big, one of the Gedolim or something like that, you say, what do you mean? Look at her. She has a bigger dot than you did. He says, yeah, but if you look at her in comparison to her husband, it might not be like that. It's according to the level. So, what does it mean? Dat kal, shadat and kal, it means who built the oimek hadat. So, since he doesn't have the oimek hadat very deeply into the thing, memele daitek Torah, like a little kid.
Right.
But since he's not very deeply into the thing, so therefore his dot is also short. And it's the same thing like we said about Bina, that the depth brings about the width and the length. That you notice if somebody is really deep into a certain thing, like I knew this kid that had, he looked like he had no dots at all.
Right.
He had no attention span for nothing. In school, he had no attention span for nothing. But he loved hockey.
Right.
So he had these books on hockey with whole pages of statistics. It looked like a whole mathematical book. And you see, in mathematics, he was doing lousy. But when it was hockey, like the statistics of what this guy shot and how many points he scored, and he could sit with it for hours. And you see all of a sudden, so you see that according to the oimik of the das that you have into something, that's the length will become longer. He'll be able to have a much longer attention span.
Right.
The hever zeh ben koli adas l'omki adas, when people have a light das and people have deep das, ben godel l'kotan, this is the same thing like an older person and a younger person. Yadua, shatinok shadai takal, a tinok has a light das. Hainu, she'en bo koyach hamargish v'yitkashus klal ledover zeh shemevin oroitze, bai, rak b'chitzonius ma'it, that he doesn't have such a strong, real feeling or hitkashrus to this thing, only in a very external way. Al ken yitpatili pucho. That's why, like a kid, he wants this toy, and you get him the toy, 2 seconds later he's already forgot about it.
Right.
Why? He wanted it so much. Why? Because the hitkashrus was only in a very chitzonius way. It was not really touching him in the inner level.
Right.
Like a communist or something like that.
Right.
Right? I mean, he's makusher in it in a much more inner way. Hanikra hamokas hadas, which that's called hamokas hadas, the connection to the thing. Somebody's really into the thing deeply. So automatically he'll have the long attention span, and he'll be able to hold long ideas in his head, and he'll also be able to have the reichav of seeing it in many different ways. The nalba bina, like it said in bina, that the oirech and the reichav come from the lek.
The depth.
The siman lahamokas hadas, the external siman that somebody's concentrating, who asher nireh Ke'inyan tzimtzum v'kibutz kli hamoyach la'etzem oimek itashrusoi b'muskol. It looks like he's fetching up his brain as far as how deeply he is connected to the muskol. Like Rabbi Reichik Olav Shalom, you know, when he davened, you know, Rabbi Reichik had a long, sharp nose.
Right.
You know, I saw sometimes when he davened, he would concentrate so hard that his nose would come out through the back of his tallis. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That's the siman that you cletch up your face, you know? The siman, as it cletches up his face, it almost looks like he's trying to cletch up his brain. That's the external siman on it. The Lashon Yiddish, is a derinnen phenomenon for kvetch stark. He's really all taken up and all strongly for kvetch there. This as is there metzumtzam, because he's very metzumtzam. Rak bitnu achas v'skira achas lavad, in one movement and one look.
He's totally focused on one thing.
He's totally focused on one thing, and the external thing of it is it looks like he's for kvetching his brain.
Right.
His whole face gets farkvetched. Shemizeh davka ba etzem oimek hasoga, that davka from this thing of getting totally farkvetched into the one inyan. In other words, like for instance, right now, even though we're like we said that the whole book is really one hemshech, and you have to hold to really do the iyan finally, you have to hold the whole book in your head.
Right.
But right now we're totally fakvetch only into the inyan of das.
Right.
You notice here also, the book is always, it's a funny thing, this book is always a mushal on itself. You can always use whatever you're talking about, you can use it as a mushal of what you're talking about.
Right.
So like right now, we're totally fakvetched about das. Like we're not thinking about Malchus of Tvuna, or how the Oisius come out, Leah comes out, or what's the difference between Chochmah and Bina, or how the Ksarim are. Not only that, if we would think about it, it would detract from our ha'amoka into this.
Right.
If we would now start discussing all kinds of other things, Like, sometimes that's the whole thing of, it says a good student asks according to the Inyan.
Right.
If now all of a sudden you start asking, oh yeah, but what about Malchus of Tvuna? So what are you talking about, Malchus of Tvuna? We're talking about Das. So yeah, okay, but what about Malchus of Tvuna? And what about the Yud of the Sag? And what about this and what about that? It would actually detract and you wouldn't learn nothing.
Right.
And the whole thing that brings about the Ha'amokah into the Muskal means not the Ha'amokah of the Das, to understand the real Oimek HaMusag that we're trying to learn over here, is because we're fakvetching ourselves dafka into this Inyan. And we're leaving aside all the other Inyanim.
Right.
And dafka through this, etzem Oimek HaSoga al yedei Iyun de Bina. That the Iyun of Bina means to cut it up into little pieces. But now we are only going into the one piece.
Right.
Okay, but the Iyun Abina, Shehu Hefech HaTzimtzum VaKibutz. What does it mean? She'areh Iyun Abina, Gam She'emed Mu'uka B'Tzimtzum VaKibutz B'Tchilot. So in the beginning he talks about one point. Aval miyad mitpashut l'rechav harbe b'kol pratei chaloka, the Malchus of Tvuna and the Oisius and Sotan and Pnina and
Right.
the Malachim, and that's the whole thing. The whole thing of Hitbonenut means to cut it up into all its sections and all its parts, and this is exactly the opposite, that we're not going to go into everything. We're only going to go into Das, nothing else. And if, let's say this was a class with students, and I was a teacher, if somebody would bring up a question about Malchus of Tuna, and I would tell them, hey, what are you talking about? Why are you interrupting the class?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Ba'afchonas, Pratius, Harbe, the whole thing is to examine all the different particulars, Keyadua as is known. Masha Enken Hatzimtzum Vakibutz Damas Kazadat, that is exactly the opposite. Adrabah, just the opposite. Hurak Hatzimtzum is not to go into all the things, but rather the opposite, to be metzamtzim away all the other things. Shehu HaKibutz V'Asifra Mekol Koach Sichlo, to focus and gather together the whole power of your brain, Litashe Rak B'Muskol Zeh, only in that. Like what we're doing now. So we're taking our whole power of our brain. So why are we focusing our whole brain? I mean, there's so many things to think about, and we're thinking only about that. It's exactly the opposite of Bina. It's exactly the opposite of analyzing all the different parts. The Loshen Idish, der klep mit dem Arayin Legen sich gar. He only busies himself with only this thing, and nothing else.
Right.
Like over here, that we are only busying ourselves just with the Indian of Das and nothing else, and we're totally focusing our brain and gathering the whole power of our brain and putting it only on this to the exclusion of everything else. The Omnam, however, al yedei hamokas hadas, bal yedei amkus hamuskol ad shorsha be'imke chochma bina. Davka, from this thing of concentrating on it, that when we're learning this point, in other words, it's not that we're not going to learn the other points, and we're just going to stay with this and stay with this forever. And we'll go over and over and over and over again. We'll sit in a cave in the Himalayas and we'll go, Das is the Ha'amokah. Das is the concentration of all the powers of your brain. Das is the concentration of all the powers of your brain. Das is, that's what they do basically.
Right.
Right? So it's not that we're not going to get to the other points. We're going to get to the other points. And when we get to the next point, like the next chapter is going to be about Tavuna, so then we're going to forget about Das.
Right.
And then we're going to talk about Tavuna and concentrate the whole thing dafka on that. So when you're doing a particular point, you're totally concentrated on that point. And that is what will bring you to the actual oimek of the muskol, all the way to how it is in the oimek of Chochmah and Bina, and like it said in the Talumas Chochmah. Ad Chinas Das Elyon, this is all the way till the upper Das, the Mezavik Chochmah Labina, that is like the Kesser, which is above Chochmah and Bina, and puts them both together. In other words, when you have the inner connection, that means that you know the thing. That's what they say, that you know the thing already. You learned it, and now you know it. Know it means the knowledge, not the Das Tachton. The Das Tachton is the Das that's only the Keli. The Das Elyon means that the thing is now part of your brain. It's connected to you. It's one thing with you. Like Adam Yada Chava, they became one thing.
Right.
So the Das Elyon means that you learned it, and now the whole Chochmah and Bina is all connected together in the Kesser, which connects the Chochmah and Bina together. Like it said before, Be'inyan oimek amusak da Bina. But I know the Das gonus v'puma de ima. That's the thing. The Das is hidden inside the mouth of Bina. Meaning basically that dafka from the mouth of Bina is it says like in a thing, what do you call it? That the mouth is like Malchus.
Right.
But it's like the upper Malchus. You know, so that dafka from when you want to say out the Bina, like what we're doing now, you have to bring the Das into it. That's where the Das is hidden. In other words, before we weren't concentrating on this. Dafka now that we want to bring it out, we want to talk it out, that's when you see that the concentration automatically comes into it. We're really not trying to concentrate.
Right.
We're not doing like the yogi. That we sat down and now we're going to concentrate. We're not trying to concentrate. We're trying to understand.
Right.
And not only we're trying to understand, we're trying to have a lesson, actually. We're talking. So in order to do that, automatically you see that the Das becomes revealed.
Right.
Because that's where it was hidden in the first place. That Moshe is the Das, which doesn't mean the Das like the Das of the Goyim. There's a Jewish Das. But the Jewish Das means it's dafka into the Pina.
Right.
Whereas the Goyish Das means that it's Das of Toihu, that the whole thing of Toihu is that each sphere is on its own. It's not connected to the other sphere. So the Goyish Das is not connected to Bina. It's just Das. It's just concentration on what? Well, what do you mean on what? Concentration is just all by itself.
Right.
Toihu.
Right.
So Dafka Moshe, which is the Das, because he was connected to the Inyan, that's why he was Zayichet to the Bina, which is the Shar Hanun. Because it's Mamish, one depends on the other. Like it says, what is it? If there's no Das, there's no Bina. If there's no Bina, there's no Das.
Right.
So what does it mean? If there's, I think that's the order, right? If there's no Das, there's no Bina. If there's no Bina, there's no Das, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's the way it says it, right?
Yeah.
So what does it mean? If you don't concentrate on your lesson, you won't understand nothing. And if there's nothing to understand, you're going to lose interest.
Right.
And also, if there's no Das Tachton of concentrating on the lesson, then there's not going to be no understanding. If there's no understanding, then there won't be the Das Elyon, you won't know nothing.
Right.
Means if there's just concentration with no explanation, it won't go from Das Tachton to Das Elyon. You won't know nothing. You'll just sit there and concentrate, and you won't know nothing. And if you do end up knowing something, it will just be a vain imagination.
Right.
What time is it now? Okay, we can, you want to start on the next chapter a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so let me flip the tape.